Good morning. It's Friday, January 31st. We've had a long week, a good week. We're going to finish up this week with Vermont Agricultural and Food Systems. Looks like we have Jake Calero, Farm to Plate Network Director, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, sitting in the witness chair.
Yep.
You going to lead us off?
Yeah.
Floor is yours, sir. Tell us what you want us to know.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, for the record, Jake Calero, I'm the Farm to Plate Director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and a resident of Berry City. My thanks and appreciation for having me today, and it's always a pleasure. So I'm going to share here presentation with you all as I go through things. Make sure that gets up there. Yeah, I'll just do the screen. All right, get that up.
Knock that thing down. Yeah. The way it always does that.
All right, make sure that's up. Yeah, good. All right. So today here we're going to do an overview of the Farm to Plate Investment Program. Oh, this is the wrong presentation. Sorry, hold on. I'm going to stop that.
So you're showing us something.
I was going to say, I don't want to show that the Senate committee what I showed the House. So here, let me.
That's good to know.
Only joking.
Sure.
Senator Major will tear that out.
I promise this is much better. This is much better.
Oh my gosh, Jake.
I know. I'm digging the whole deeper.
You learn from the 17th to.
Senator Major, report back to me.
Yeah.
And actually, I think what else? Okay, there we go.
I got
Have introductions taken place?
Excuse
Did
me?
I miss introductions?
Feel free.
So just for the record, Ellen Kaler, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, the Executive Director, and we administer Vermont Farm to Plate. So Jake is going to be doing the presentation. I'm part of the team.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. All up there. There we go. Great. So for today, we'll be giving an overview of the Farm to Plate Investment Program and what is essentially a status update on some key elements of Vermont's food system, which is part of our role in administering the investment program. So here we go. The first thing that I wanted to let you all know is just that you can find the Farm to Plate Investment Program in Vermont's statute. So it is in statute, Title 10, and it is part of the Sustainable Jobs Fund's statute. And you can find all the details of the Farm to Plate Investment Program in terms of creation goals, tasks, and methods in there in subsection 330. And so the other, I think, point to make here too is that the program and the plan that has resulted from it is the state's food system plan, and it is unique. We are unique as a state having our food system plan in statute. So this enabling legislation was passed in 2009, and what it does is it tasks the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, so the organization that Ellen and I work for, with creating a strategic plan for agriculture and food system development, and then also establishing the Farm to Plate program to fulfill the following outcomes. So these were the outcomes as defined when the legislation was passed in 2009. I'll share with you how they've been changed slightly in the next slide. So the main focus was to increase economic development in Vermont's farm and food sector, or food and farm sector, create jobs in the food and farm economy, and improve access to healthy local foods. So a big component of economic development paired with food security and food access. And then what we mean when we're talking about a food system is that we're looking at everything from farm inputs, so seed, land, water, et cetera, to all the way from production, processing, the distribution of food, the sale of food, consumer demand that exists around it, and then also nutrient management. So whether that's food that needs to get recycled back into the ground as nutrients, or food that can be rescued and served to Vermonters if it's still in a state of being consumable. So we were looking at the real totality of things that it requires to produce food, to move food, to sell food, to eat, and then to manage nutrients. And we're looking at this as in the center of this diagram here on the image is that we're looking at that as the private sector, the businesses involved in those activities, and then there's a support system around that. So we've got that's policymakers, nonprofits like the Jobs Fund, technical service providers, et cetera, that support those activities in the private sector. And then this legislation was reauthorized in 2019. So the state, legislature determined that the first plan and the process was successful and reauthorized it. And so now we're in the phase of having another 10-year strategic plan that covers the years 2021 to 2030, and that's the document here on your desk. And we're going to get into kind of what's contained within here in a little bit. And so the outcomes in the reauthorization were changed slightly. So the first two economic development outcomes were consolidated into one outcome to increase sustainable economic development and create jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector. And then there was an added outcome related to the environment to improve soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change. And then the access outcome stayed the same. So some slight changes that happened in that reauthorization. And just also just awareness of this plan doesn't just exist sort of in the plan only. This plan has strategies and recommendations and goals from this have influenced and made their way into other state plans. So if you look at those, you may recognize there are oftentimes word for word similarities. And so the plan has influenced and made its way into other state planning efforts, including the Climate Action Plan. So the Climate Action Plan has an ag and forestry and working landscape section that has a lot of recommendations that were either directly pulled from or influenced from the Food System Plan. The Governor's Commission on the Future of Ag used the plan as a basis to develop some more specific policy recommendations. So it has had influence at the administrative level. There's the food security roadmap. So I think this committee has maybe heard from members of the Food Security Coalition or directly from the Food Security Coalition. So that document, the roadmap, is kind of a deeper dive into the healthy local food access components of the strategic plan. And then even at the regional level, New England Feeding New England. So there's New England state efforts to do more coordination in the region for self-sufficiency and supply chain resilience. And the farm to plate, the strategic plan has been a big influence in that process as well. So a lot of alignment across different elements of state efforts and now regional. And then not going to go too far into detail of the specific actions, but so the thing that we have done is that creating the plan was one thing, but we didn't want, and people we work with didn't want it to be just a plan that sits idly on a shelf. We wanted to make sure that it actually was implemented. So we created the Farm to Plate Network back in 2011 to take the plan into action. And so we coordinate the Farm to Plate Network, which has over 300 members that spans farms and food businesses, nonprofits, universities, agencies. So many different people working in food and agriculture are part of the network. And in coordinating that, we're trying to implement strategies in aligned ways in order to reach the goals that are outlined in the plan. So we've been doing that since 2011, and those activities have spanned from working with the meat processing sector to working with independent grocers, to working with grass-fed beef producers, helping town planners with planning for food access in agriculture at the municipal level and also the regional level, and doing some efforts too in workforce development in the food sector. So it's really spanning diversity of different issue areas in the food system as a part of that.
Yes. So plan was developed.
Yeah.
You have some goals.
Yeah.
It started in 2011.
Yeah. Yeah.
how successful have you been in reaching those goals? And what obstacles have you encountered in that 15 or so year period?
Yeah, so I have some more slides to answer some more specific elements of that, but I'll just say we did an analysis of how successful were we in implementing strategies, recommendations from the plan, which I can share with you afterwards. And I think we determined that about 80% of the strategies were implemented. About like 10% of what wasn't implemented was determined to be no longer relevant as conditions changed. And then like another 10% were carried over into the new plan as like things that still need to be done. And then just as I get into some of the kind of like, how are we doing? We have made incredible strides in terms of economic output and diversifying production in the state, reaching new markets. I think challenges still remain around scaling new industries in the agricultural sector to kind of match with what's happened with dairy. So dairy just being such a larger industry and having some struggles is how do we build up other industries to either take on farmland that's going out of production or just diversify our production portfolio to be more resilient, so we're not so reliant on one commodity. Land access is an emergent issue that's becoming a problem in terms of land prices and getting onto land. And I think food security is a huge challenge for the state right now. And a lot of Vermonters in need, and so there's a lot of factors that go into addressing that issue, and that's one that we've seen progress, but there's still just some large structural challenges to addressing it. And I think that and I'll go over some more kind of details around that.
Thank you.
And just to kind of highlight in the last year some of the things that we've been up to as a network. So we've been helping farm and food businesses with distribution and retail sales, technical assistance, so really trying to focus on like wholesale readiness. We've been helping farm and food businesses with infrastructure planning and acquiring funding for infrastructure investment. We've been doing project work for a beef on dairy genetics program to help the dairy industry connect more with our beef industry and utilize the infrastructure and talent really that exists with our dairy producers and provide them with some transitional strategies into the beef industry. We're working with 6 food hubs across the state that do distribution for a lot of small and mid-scale producers in the state. We formed the Food Security Coalition. We're doing financial and legal feasibility analysis for farmland access models that have kind of shared equity approaches or looking at multiple owners of single properties, which can have a lot of legal and financial challenges. And then also we've been helping to secure funding for CSA and healthcare programs. So there's a network of programs that exist in the state to aid their further development and scaling of services. So that's just some things in the last year. All right, so in terms of just how to kind of, for you all as you do your work and take testimony and develop policy, how can this be a resource to you and how to sort of understand and use this document? So just the basic kind of at a high level understanding here is that we've taken the 3 legislative outcomes, so economic development, climate resiliency, environmental sustainability, and food access, and we've converted that into vision, goals, objectives, priority strategies, and then there are these product, market, and issue brief recommendations that in a lot of ways are the foundations of those other elements, and I'm going to get into those in a bit. So those are the kind of basic components of the plan. And then I did want to start actually in the back, so the back of the document with these products.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
How many people in your organization?
How many people?
Yeah.
14.
Yeah, 14, but in the program it's like 4.
Not even.
It's 3. Let's see, 1, 2, 4 full time. Yeah, it is 4. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So, if you go to, starting on page 38, so this plan was, developed with the input of 1,500 Vermonters. So this is not like, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund's plan. This is not the Agency of Ag's plan, although we partnered and worked closely with the Agency of Agriculture in creating this. This is the work of over 1,500 people who have involvement in farming and food, and also members of the public who provided input and perspective on what they want out of the future of agriculture in Vermont. So if you have questions about any kind of product being produced in Vermont, the product briefs are going to give you a 2-page synopsis and summary of the current conditions, the challenges and opportunities, and then a set of recommendations in order to address those. So these are great reference material for understanding like what's the state of a particular industry or crop in Vermont, and what are some things that are challenging that industry, and what are some of the opportunities that we can take advantage of. So those are all, very, very short. The dairy brief is the longest at 6 pages, but most of them are 2 pages to provide just quick and easy kind of reference access. And then the issue briefs cover things like financing, farmland access, succession, farmland conservation, so kind of issue areas that impact across those industries. And then the market briefs cover different market channels that our farms and food producers are selling into. So like institutions, retail, direct markets, and that kind of thing. So those serve as a really good, just reference basis for you all, and something also if you have questions about a certain industry or an interest, you can use that.
Subject matter experts on that.
Yeah, and so each of these was developed by a group of subject matter experts. So on the bottom of the last page of each, you'll see that who prepared the material and the team that was involved in putting it together. So again, this is the product of experts in the field and farmers and food producers who are involved in these different activities. Yes, and also each of these was also reviewed and checked by the Agency of Agriculture to ensure that, from a regulatory standpoint, it was saying factually correct things, and was kind of representative of issues that the agency has purview over. So that's another component of just the validation of what went into the process to create these. Then,
this is tremendous.
Yeah.
So I gotta give you kudos on that, particularly for someone who is loves Cliff Notes.
That's right.
But the one issue that I do have is that the beer is just 1 page.
There's a hops one though too.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we disentangled. Yeah, we focused on the inputs and also the value added side. So so there's that, and then the recommendations that are in each of these briefs was used to create a synthesis to get to creating priority strategies. So what are the commonalities and themes that we saw in recommendations from these briefs is what then has been converted into and expressed in the priority strategies, which start on page 29 of the document. So if you go there are then 34 priority strategies. And so again, these are kind of another quick way to reference, if you were to read all those briefs and pick out the themes, these are the things that are really critical to do in order to reach the goals of the plan. And some of them are, very specific to funding working lands at a base level of 1.5 million, to some things that are maybe a little more broad of like, we need to make investment in storage, processing, and distribution. And the types of investment differs depending on the industry you're talking about. So that's where then you could go to a specific brief to kind of understand, what those specific investments might be. And so that's where there is a table that is also in this document that you can reference where you can see a priority strategy. So then storage and investment, or storage, processing, and distribution infrastructure investment, priority strategy 7. You'll see that it's made up of a lot of recommendations from various briefs that are in the plan. And so, yeah, so that's the priority strategies. There's 34 of those. And yeah. And then lastly, there are the strategic goals. So that's on page 13, starting on page 13. And these are really like the signposts of if we're doing the right things, these are the outcomes that we would like to see by 2030. That these things would be true in 2030 if we were implementing the priority strategies and the recommendations from the briefs. And so these cover 4 different categories. So there's economic development is one section, environmental sustainability is another, healthy local food for all Vermonters, and then racial equity. And let me move to the next slide. So economic development, for instance, we're looking at increasing, output, employment establishments, increasing demand for Vermont food, diversifying Vermont's production portfolio, increasing, improving the working conditions, wages, safety and health of those who are working in the food system, but also providing employers with a diverse and reliable workforce that is meeting their needs. On the environmental sustainability side, we want to increase carbon sequestration. We want to have enhanced farm stewardship for ecological diversity and soil and water quality, but also ensure that farm stewards are supported and compensated for their work in doing that. We want to conserve our agricultural land base and promote planning that keeps agriculture in ag production. And we want to manage food scraps and other food residuals for their highest and best use. And then for healthy local food, we're looking at different components of people having the financial resources to access local food, people having locations to access local food, people having the knowledge and skills to do that, and having a food system that's resilient and able to respond in times of emergency. And then racial equity is looking at removing the structural elements that create racism in the food system in Vermont, and really uplifting the leadership of BIPOC in the state who are working in food and farming. So those are goals. I'll just take a pause because now we're going to get into some data around like how are we actually doing related to these. So I don't know if there's
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Jake, pages 20 or let's say 30 through 33 outline the priority strategies.
Yeah.
The word fund or funding is in a significant number of those, including 8 new positions, 25 additional positions.
Yeah.
Is there a chart somewhere kind of at the end that says, here's what we get now in terms of funding, here's what we're asking for? Because it's difficult to add them up in my head as I go through.
So we do have a spreadsheet that outlined the different sort of funding investment needs. And the assumption is not that the ask is of the state to do all these things, right? This is also a document for philanthropic funders. This is a document for organizations that are, looking for investment or funding opportunities. So it's just trying to understand the scale of that. And we do have a spreadsheet that we have a number. So that's something that we could look at and provide that back. Because I can't recall just off the top of my head of what that number is. And we can certainly look at, the existing state investment dollars that go into the food system.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. So Yeah, so how are we doing? So I'm gonna go through there's gonna be a lot of data here, so it's just gonna be pretty dense, so, hold tight. So let's look at the economic development, goals. So how are we doing, around, economic output, demand for food, the diversity of our production? I think the big takeaway here is that if you're looking at Vermont's food system as total economic output, is producing $11.5 billion of economic activity for the state. And you can break that down by different elements of food production, distribution, and retail. So production and processing alone is $4.3 billion being generated by our farms and food manufacturers. And then distribution, kind of wholesaling of food adds another $3.6 billion of activity. And then retail and food service is another about 3.6 billion. So 11.5 billion of output, and that has increased over time. So when we started tracking this figure, it was, I think, somewhere in the 7 billion range. So you've got a lot of increased output over time. And, we're talking about agriculture now alone is a $1 billion sector of Vermont's economy. That's important. Yeah, I'll get it. And so what does that mean in terms of employment? So we'll get into the kind of specific breakdowns of categories here, but if you're looking at everyone who's employed, involved in farming or food, from production to retail, in essence, it's almost 63,500 people. And that's a 9.4% increase in employment since 2009. We did see there was a 10% decrease during COVID from 2019 to 2020, but we've seen the majority of those jobs come back. So 4,900 net new jobs since the decline of COVID. And this in total is 20.6% of total employment in Vermont. So again, huge footprint that our food system has in terms of output and employment in the state. And then, the breakdown here. So farm operators and hired farm labor are 33% of that employment in the food system. Retail is definitely a large component, about 49%. But also food manufacturing is 12%, so almost 7,400 people doing food manufacturing. And so if you look at farm operators, hired farm labor and food manufacturing, that alone is almost 10% of Vermont's total labor force. And then if you're looking at some of the trends over time across these categories, most of the losses during COVID were related to retail employment. So that accounts for 92% of total COVID employment loss from 2019 to 2020 was in the retail industry. And then for other categories, there's been sustained growth and also a resilience of employment, through COVID. I think food manufacturing is something to point out here, as employment there has increased almost 23% since 2012. And then on the establishment side, so there's a lot of food farming establishments in the state, 11,700, and that's a 4.3% increase since 2009. And a little different here is that there has been an almost 11% decrease in the number of farms in the state since 2012. Food manufacturing has increased nearly 20%, distributors almost 24%, and then retailers almost 17%. So I think the increase in distributors could in part be that farm and food businesses that are doing self-distribution have basically set up a separate distribution component to their business. We also have increase in number of food hubs, and there are a lot of small kind of independent beverage and specialty distributors that have come online since 2012. So that's what the establishment profile looks like. Yeah.
Excuse me, Jake, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you go back to the last
Yeah.
slide, please? So a decrease in farms since 2012. One, is that alarming? But an increase in manufacturing, distribution, and retailers. Or is it that we're getting stuff from out of state? Why is that happening?
Yeah. So the decrease in farms is certainly tied to the decrease in the number of dairies in the state. It's also that there were a lot of, you know, small diversified farms that came into farming in around the 2012 time and have, you know, usually 10 years is kind of the test of whether that business or farm will stick around. So I think there has been also a decline in some of the diversified operations, but mainly, you know, I think the driver there has been dairy. However, some of that is consolidation. Some of that has been, farms kind of still operating the same amount of acreage, but it's less number. There are things to be worried about there, but there's also some things that are just part of the kind of the changes in the dairy industry that are happening. The food manufacturing increase, I think, can be looked at as, there's a lot of, whether that's, we'll get into some of this, of like, there have been increases in dairy processing, there has been increases in meat processing. There are a lot of more specialty food manufacturers, beverage manufacturers. So some of that is, they may be bringing in inputs from other states, but they're also providing opportunities for producers in state to sell to them and add value to their products. So the food I think the thing to watch then with food manufacturing is really trying to tie, the success of the value added that their activities that they're involved with ensuring that like inputs are coming from, producers in state. And how we, a lot of our work is trying to make sure that we're strengthening those ties and building that relationship because it does have a compounding effect. And in looking at other New England states and Vermont actually, because of we've done some analysis of like economic multipliers, Vermont does have stronger ties between its processors and its farm production than other New England states. So that's, I think that's a good sign. The distribution one also, I think, is a good sign in terms of market access for our food producers. You need distribution to get your product to market, and the more options you have, frankly, at times, the more leverage you have to negotiate better terms or find something that works better for your business. This is kind of interesting to me because nationally, there's been so much consolidation and distribution that it's created a lot of issues for access for smaller producers. So, I think we have perhaps a unique kind of environment for distribution in the state. And I think maybe John Ramsey was here talking about some work at CAE. They're one of those entities providing distribution services, and that's that's unique for the state of Vermont and something that we need to continue to ensure that those types of operations are thriving so that our producers have options for access.
I think where I'm struggling with this presentation is it's a great overview of what's going on, and I think that you certainly can tell us what's happening in the industry and all aspects of it. But I'm looking to see what you guys are doing for it. Are you guys advising these people? Are you advisory? Because we're doing this, we're doing that, but I can't see what you guys are doing in this. I mean, I see the presentation where you're putting it together and you're bringing all this information to us, but what is it that you're doing? And so as you go, if you could just say, well, this is what we're doing. This is how we're helping. Because I'm missing that in this presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the case of, say, retailers, we are providing independent retailers in the state of Vermont with business coaching services, with merchandising for their stores, with marketing help. So very direct technical services, and business coaching, to those retailers. We're also helping them work with, distributors to buy more local food and bring more local food into their stores. And we're providing, services to producers, so both farms and value-added producers, to understand how they work with distributors, how they can build their business, to gain access to retailers. So we've run a number of sort of intensive cohort-based workshops with those farm and food producers, to run them through kind of the essentials of how they manage their business, and how they market their product, how they build their business systems to gain access to the retail environment.
So are these people coming to you, or you going to them, or how are they finding you, or how do they know? I mean, are you so embedded in these communities that they automatically know, where to go, how to find you, what to do,
Sure.
what our problems are, how to,
Yeah, so we have a big reach, but we do a lot of outreach. We work with different associations in Vermont, especially Food Association, retailers, retail grocers. So we're doing a lot of outreach. We're working with other partners to bring farms and food producers to these programs, and then in doing them over a number of years, it builds up some awareness and recognition of the value of those services to others. And so, we probably have a backlog, of people that would like to be a part of some of these things, and just we have limitations to the number of people that we can serve. And we're also doing business coaching with specific food businesses, to provide them again with like business planning, marketing assistance, product development. So a lot of like direct work with businesses around improving their operations, their sales, their marketing, things like that. On the distributor, so I mentioned we're working with, so there's 6 food hubs in the state that are providing distribution services. So we are coordinating that group of food hubs right now and providing them with sort of strategic support, advisory capacity, and also helping them get access to more investment and funding to improve their infrastructure. What they're trying to do too now is, they're working in different parts of the state. We're trying to get, their services to be more integrated across the state so that they're working together, and also accessing markets outside of Vermont. So we're involved in a lot of, advisory, strategic planning, and also
so how would you make a group like John Ramsey's group better? Well, with all of that, John comes to you, and you're the next step as far as where his organization can't get to, or you're in conjunction with them.
So John, we're working with John and his team, and they have an operations staff, and they have a lot of issues of like, how do we move more product to the southern part of the state, and work in collaboration with Food Connects in Brattleboro. We need to understand, like, what are we going to invest in terms of infrastructure to make that work better. And so that's where we come in and help to support them in answering those types of questions, and then also coordinating to find the funding and resources to make that happen. And that is not just a benefit to John and his team, but also to the team down in Brattleboro. And that team is working with the folks in Rutland, the Vermont Farmer Food Center, and also in Addison County with the Addison County Relocalization Network. So all these things then start, the things that we can do and learn with those 2 entities, we can also help to move into other parts of the state. So it's, kind of making those connections, providing access to more resources, and making sure like what's being learned and done in that is efficient and can be brought to other places in the state.
Okay, thank you.
And this is ongoing now?
Part of our, part of also sometimes, talking broadly, is also that part of our responsibility in the statute is to like report on these kind of higher level trends. But again, like we're involved in a lot of direct activities. I mentioned there's a dairy beef genetics program that we're involved with. So that's working with producers to develop a breeding program that's adding value to Holstein cows by crossbreeding them with Wagyu genetics. And now we've helped to create a startup that has a direct-to-consumer program. They're doing, they're participating in sort of livestock brokerage sales, and they also have some sales now emerging in some stores in the New England region, including the Middlebury Co-op. So that's just an example of like a direct project that we've helped to really bring partners together to create that business and to help support kind of the initial startup phase with some funding and technical assistance and things like that.
So Jake, who's the biggest retailer in Vermont for locally grown food? Is it the grocery chains or is it more on a farmer's market kind of level?
Yeah, actually, have some.
Oh, all right.
We'll get there. So we'll get there. Actually, I think that's coming up. Just big, again, kind of big picture here of like value products sold. So this is the value products sold off farm, $554 million increase since 1997. This is not adjusted for inflation, so there's kind of some elements to interpret here. But again, agriculture in the state of Vermont is $1 billion industry now, and sales have continued to increase. What makes up those sales by commodity group? Milk is still the majority percentage. So it's milk alone is about 60% of value that's being generated. But we've seen some real significant increases in other industries in the state. So maple syrup increased by 54 million, that's almost doubled in the last period. Vegetable sales increased nearly 70%. Poultry and eggs increased by 10 million or almost 90%. So there's some diversification happening in the state.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. The dairy farms we've lost almost about half, but the milk has increased. Is it just a situation we've gotten rid of the ones that weren't productive?
Or smaller ones.
Or
smaller, yeah.
Smaller ones. More cows, fewer farms.
Yeah.
Madison County, they produce more milk now than they did when we had.
Franklin too.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and you'll see this in some of the land use stuff that I'll share, but yeah, there's been a shift of, there's, less like dairy acreage, but more actually like acreage and feed production. So there's been just some shifts within, farms and how they participate in the dairy industry.
Is that significant? I mean, 18% is significant.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the, I think the other messages as you look through this data is that don't want to diminish the struggles and the loss of farms and dairy, but it's still a very successful and economically productive industry. And yeah, there's just been a lot of changes that have been happening, and there's some great work to support the changes that are happening and kind of shifting to value-added production and whatnot. So yeah.
Well, the Beef on Dairy project is in part to provide additional revenue streams to dairy farmers who, for what their animals that then become beef. Right? So it's additional types of revenue and not just fluid milk, for instance.
Yeah. And just to, kind of take a closer look at some of these other categories. So if we're looking at non-dairy livestock, which is maybe not the greatest term, but we have seen growth there. And again, poultry and egg sales nearly doubled since 2007 and basically have nearly doubled since 2017. We've got a strong beef industry. Poultry and eggs is kind of emerging. There's sheep and goat, other animals and animal products, which is basically like diversified meat. farms, and then pigs is small, but has also been a growing area for livestock. And then on the produce side, vegetable sales have really driven a lot of the growth in the kind of produce industries. So nearly, more than tripled since 2007. Vegetable farming is definitely has a larger kind of economic imprint or footprint in the state, and I think is kind of getting to this point of maturity of needing more processing infrastructure, kind of looking at how does that industry add value to what it's producing. But I think one of the challenges to think about here is, yes, growth, and there's diversification happening, but are these farms viable as businesses? And so we have seen this crossover of the percentage of farms that report net gains and net losses. So in 1997, more farms were reporting net gains than net losses. Since that time now, there are more farms that report net losses than net gains. So 57% of farms are reporting net losses. And so that, that is a significant concern of, are these changes that are happening in sales and value add production, what's the return back to farms, and how do we improve that? And then you can look at this by sort of net farm income by size of farm. So up to 139 acres, on average, a farm is likely going to be losing money. The average farm size in Vermont is 180 acres. So there's only one category below that, the 140 to 179, that on average is likely to be producing a net positive income. So just I think that's something to consider of scale, in terms of scale, and what's required to be profitable is like the actual land base that you need. And of course this varies depending on the type of production of the farm, but just as a general trend, I think is concerning and something to look at. And then you can also look at this by the sort of sales class of farm. So up until, and actually these are net figures in total, so these are should be read in millions of dollars. So until you get to that $25,000 sales range, on average, farms below that sales range are likely to be losing money, and in net are losing money in the state of Vermont. And and the majority of net income that's being generated is coming from 2.6% of farms. They're accounting for 66.8% of the positive net income that's in this graph. So this also influences how we look at technical services and investment, and what kinds of farms are likely to kind of be in a stage of development to be successful and profitable. And it's not to say that farms below $25,000 can't, but if you're looking at kind of a growth trajectory, you want to try to be getting farms up to and beyond that to really think about like their profitability as a business. And then just lastly, this impacts farm viability is the value of farmland. So that the value of farmland per acre has been increasing almost 59% since 2010. I think there's you can look at this from a different lens of if you own farmland and value is increasing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're looking to purchase and get onto the land, this presents challenges, and especially for new and beginning farms who might be shifting the farmland that they're purchasing, the type of production that's happening. There's generally believed there's like a 5-year period of really ramping up sales and getting to establishing yourself. And so as the value of land increases, that just presents more challenges for profitability in those early critical stages for new and beginning farms. All right, now some food processing. So I mentioned, the dairy kind of shifts in dairy, definitely moving more towards value-added production, and dairy product manufacturing is $1.78 billion industry. Cheese, which is a subset of that, is 1.2 billion. So really, really big industries and impactful, economic output. But we've definitely seen this trend of increase of dairy processing in the state, both on and off farm. So, on farm processing numbers have increased over time, and that speaks to I think a lot of the sort of artisan cheese movement, different value-added products that farms themselves are producing. And so a lot of diversity of types of processing happening in dairy.
You said that cheese is a subset of the 1.7 million, so really the cheese makes up well over 2/3.
Yeah.
Just think about, what comes out of the Cabot plant in Middlebury. It's a lot.
Yeah. Again, I think whether or not people recognize, that cheese manufacturing has that kind of economic impact, it's not insignificant. And then meat slaughter and processing, that's another big area of processing activity in the state. We have seen growth here, but not quite as accelerated maybe as we've seen in dairy, but that's in part, this is a very capital intensive industry. But what we have seen is some changes in the makeup. So this CIS is, and I'm always turning to Abby to.
Cooperative interstate shipment.
Yeah, cooperative interstate shipment. So this allows a state inspected facility to sell its processed products across state lines. And that's indicative too of Vermont having really high state inspection standards. And we're one of, there's other states that have entered into these cooperative agreements. But so we've seen, there's been state facilities that have gone on to take on that type of certification, and that, enhances the market access that then meat livestock producers have.
What's the MPI mean? State MPI?
Meat processing inspection?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's just local, right? That doesn't get shipped over state lines and stuff? Is that what I would take that at?
Yeah,
And if-
so for the record, Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture, yes, so state inspected product has different kind of access than federally inspected facilities, even though the Agency of Agriculture's state meat processing inspectors also do the USDA inspection at the federal plants. But if you are just state inspected, then that product needs to stay in Vermont unless you're a part of this new cooperative interstate shipment program, which is the CIS, which means that because of Vermont state slaughter and processing inspection standards being equal to or greater than, in many cases, the federal standards, that product can be shipped out of state.
So we haven't really lost I take it that some of the processors actually moved into the
Mhm.
CIS.
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
what it was like, the state inspection that gives you like the ability to
Okay.
ship out.
Because you notice a drop in the MPI,
Yeah.
but, okay.
So the number of facilities is pretty flat. We haven't added many. I thought we
Yeah, a little bit.
tried to encourage that a little bit, but I guess we didn't do a good job.
Well, I mean, this is on a percent basis is not, I forget what it is, but it's still, there has been some growth, and also there's expansion, that's happened within existing facilities, which is where some of that investment went.
New buildings or.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's more capacity, processing capacity within the facilities that exist. And there's been some pretty large, investments in that respect. And so the agency did some surveys of meat processors in the state, about their interest in expanding capacity. And over the last 2 years, for some reason okay, there we go. So in the last 2 years, there has been, of those that responded, majority interest in expansion. There has been some uncertainty around that. So it was also asked, what's preventing you from expansion? And the two major things, the two major factors are funding and labor shortages. So we have heard from processors that say we could add a whole second shift. We have capacity to do that. We're operating at half capacity, but we don't have the labor to staff that. And so that is definitely a barrier constraint for the industry. And then on the funding side, just to add new equipment for different types of value-added production, those are very pricey investments, so it's very capital intensive. And so that at times has been another constraint for the industry to kind of expand capacity or add value to what's being processed in facilities. That's also causing uncertainty for whether or not to expand or not, taking on that risk. You want to talk? Yeah. Because you got it.
So one of the things that is happening to try to make improvements on the availability of meat processing labor is, and I don't know if you've had Glenn Evans and Demetrius Reed in from Vermont State University Randolph campus yet, but there is a new facility going in that's going to be a teaching space for meat processing, meat cutting, and being done very much in conjunction with what the industry folks are saying they need. And so that's supposed to go online in March. And so they will be able to significantly increase the number of young people or people that are changing careers and wanting to get into the meat processing industry, butchering, meat cutting, because we know that there are jobs there. They're pretty decent paid jobs. They're usually $25, $26 an hour. And so that is coming online. Would encourage you to learn more about that. Demetrius Reed is amazing. He's from Rutland County, lives down in Rutland County, but he's an 8th generation from Texas, cattle grazer family, and has a PhD in meat science. And he is amazing, has his own, you may have actually been to his barbecue that he does on weekends in the Rutland area. So it'd be great to even take a trip down there. There was a ribeye cutting back in October that Chair Durfee from House Ag was able to attend. So, and that actually Senator Bobby Starr was there actually when he went to that. So yeah.
And I think the labor piece is also, as many issues are right now, tied to housing and and this is not exclusive to meat processing. We've heard this from other food manufacturers and food and farm businesses.
Everybody.
So it's across the board, just more verification that housing is really impacting the ability of businesses in the food sector to grow. And then just the last kind of piece of some analysis that we've done around infrastructure investment needs across 5 industries. So we did some analysis here and project that for facility expansion, for new equipment, for new facilities in these different industries, we're looking at, and it probably is actually more than this now, but $165 million of investment. And again, we're not saying this is the state needs to provide all these dollars. We basically tried to keep an 80-20 ratio here. So there's about $130 million of private investment need across these 5 sectors. And then also we looked at storage and distribution. That number is probably the one that's lower than what it actually is, because we know. With some recent projects for storage and distribution that, you're looking at $3 to $5 million type of facility investments. But so another 13.6 million. So there's just, a lot of investment need to enhance processing, storage, distribution infrastructure, and both for existing kind of mature industries like dairy, but also for some of these emergent and growing industries like livestock, produce, grains. Grains, for example, would be, there's been a lot of discussion and need around like having more aggregated grain facilities that can store and find markets, for different types of grain products.
Is this a good time, just take a little break?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna take a